It is the 22nd of July. Training camps open in less than 3 months. Schedules are already being drafted. Season ticket packages are already being sold in 19 different cities. And the greatest basketball player alive, the leading scorer in the entire history of this league, a man with 4 championships and 23 seasons behind him, does not have a team. Not a rumored team. Not a team he is leaning toward. No team. Nothing. He told the Los Angeles Lakers he is playing somewhere else next season, and then the whole thing went quiet, and it has stayed quiet, and nobody in this sport knows what happens next. I want to be extremely clear with you right from the start about what this video is and what it is not. This is not a report. I do not have a source inside anybody's front office. I am not going to tell you where he is going, because nobody outside a very small circle of people actually knows, and half of what you are seeing online right now is somebody guessing loudly and hoping you do not check. What I'm going to do is walk you through exactly what is confirmed, exactly what is not, and then lay out the real basketball case for every franchise that is genuinely in this conversation. When something is a fact, I will say it is a fact. When something is a scenario, I will tell you it is a scenario. That is the deal. Before we get into it, do me a quick favor. Tap the like button and hit subscribe, because a story that moves this fast dies fast on this platform if nobody engages with it, and there is a real chance this decision drops while you are watching. Takes you 2 seconds. All right, let's get into it. Let's start with what actually happened, because the actual event is smaller and stranger than the noise around it. LeBron James informed the Los Angeles Lakers that he intends to play for a different team in the 2026-27 season. That is it. That is the news. There was no farewell press conference. There was no long letter. There was no televised special with a host and a countdown clock. A player told his employer he was moving on, which happens dozens of times every summer in this league, except this time, the player is the most famous athlete in American team sports, and the employer is the Los Angeles Lakers. 8 seasons. That is what ends with that sentence. He arrived in Los Angeles in the summer of 2018 as a free agent, at a point in his career when a lot of people assumed the move was mostly about the city, about the second career, about the media company and the movies and the life after basketball. He was 33 years old. The reasonable expectation was a few good years, a nice farewell tour, and a graceful landing. That is not what happened. He stayed 8 years. He won a championship there. He passed the all-time scoring record there, in that jersey, on that floor, which is a thing that will be on every highlight reel about him forever. He played through injuries that would have ended other careers. He watched rosters get built and torn down and built again around him. He outlasted coaches. He outlasted front office regimes. He outlasted entire competitive windows. And now, at the end of July, it is over. And the way it ended is what makes this so uncomfortable for everybody involved. Eras this big are supposed to end with ceremony. This one ended with a phone call, and then silence. Here is the part that is driving the entire news cycle, and I need you to sit with it for a second, because it is genuinely unusual. He has not decided where he is going. That is not me being coy. That is the actual state of things as of today. There is no destination. There is no shortlist that has been confirmed by anybody who would actually know. And critically, there is no deadline. Nobody has said he will decide by the 1st of August. Nobody has said he will decide before camps open. There is no timetable at all, which means the entire league is sitting in a waiting room with no clock on the wall. Rich Paul, his longtime agent, has referred to him as a free agent. That is the closest thing we have to an official position from his side, and I want you to notice how careful that language is, because the careful language is the story. Referring to a player as a free agent is a description of status. It is not a confirmation of the mechanics behind that status, and there has been no public confirmation of the specifics of how the contract situation was resolved. Some of you are going to see accounts online stating those specifics as settled fact. They are not settled fact. They are inference dressed up as reporting, and I am not going to hand you inference and call it news. So let's tally it up honestly. Confirmed. He told the Lakers he is playing elsewhere. Confirmed. He has been in Los Angeles for 8 seasons. Confirmed. His representation has described him as a free agent. Confirmed. There is no decision and no deadline. Everything else you are about to hear from me, every roster fit, every argument, every scenario, is analysis. Mine and other people's. Not reporting. And one more piece of context that matters more than people realize, because it changes the shape of every scenario in this video. Whatever he does next would be his 24th season in the NBA. 24. Say that number slowly. There is no comparison for that at this level of production. Players do not last 24 years. Bodies do not last 24 years. Careers that long usually belong to specialists, to guys who found a niche and hung around at the end of benches, not to a player who is still being fought over by contenders. He was drafted in 2003. There are players in this league right now who were toddlers. There are coaches in this league who were in high school. And he is the free agent everybody is waiting on. So this is not a normal signing. This is the last chapter of the longest career anybody has ever had at this altitude, and every single team in this conversation understands that they are not just signing a player. They are buying a place in the ending of the biggest story in modern basketball. Which brings us to Cleveland. Look, everybody goes to Cleveland first. It is the first place your brain goes, and it is the first place the internet went the second the news broke, and there is a good reason for that. It is the only version of this that comes with a built-in ending. You know the history. He was drafted by the Cleveland Cavaliers in 2003, out of high school, out of Akron, which is about 40 minutes down the road from the arena. Local kid, generational talent, hometown team, first overall pick. That does not happen. Statistically, that basically never happens, and it happened there. He gave them 7 years. He took a bad franchise and dragged it to relevance and then to the finals. Then he left in 2010 for Miami, and I do not need to explain to anybody watching this what that did to that city, because it is one of the ugliest breakups in the history of American sports, and people are still emotional about it 16 years later. Then he came back. That is the part that makes Cleveland different from every other destination on this list. He came back in 2014, and in 2016 he delivered the single most improbable championship in modern NBA history, down 3-1 in the finals, against a team that had won 73 regular season games, more than anybody ever had. Nobody had ever come back from 3-1 in a finals. Not once, in the entire history of the event. They did it. He did it. And a city that had gone more than 50 years without a championship in any sport finally got one. That is not a resume line. That is a permanent thing. That is the kind of event that gets referenced in that city for 100 years. So the emotional case writes itself. And the emotional case is powerful. He starts there, he leaves, he comes back, he wins the impossible one, he leaves again for 8 years in Los Angeles, and then at the very end of the longest career in the sport, he comes home one final time to finish where he started. If you wrote that as a screenplay, an editor would send it back and tell you it is too neat. It is too clean. Real life does not close loops like that. And the whole league wants it, let's be honest about that. Media wants it because it is the best story. Fans want it because it is the most satisfying. Even neutrals want it because there is something in all of us that likes a circle closing. But I promised you the cold argument on every team, so here is the cold argument on Cleveland, and this is where the fantasy gets complicated. The Cavaliers are not a rebuilding team waiting for a savior. That was the situation in 2003, and it was roughly the situation in 2014. It is not the situation now. This is an established roster with an established identity and an established pecking order, built over years around its own core players, with its own timeline and its own way of playing. That is a good thing for them. It is not automatically a good thing for this specific fit, because you have to actually think about the mechanics. Where does the ball go? Who initiates? A 41-year-old version of this player is still a genuinely elite offensive engine, but the entire history of his career is built on having the offense run through him. Every team he has ever been great on has organized itself around his decision-making. Now imagine dropping that into a team that has spent years building a different hierarchy, with young stars who have their own contracts and their own expectations and their own reasons to believe the team is theirs. That is not a reason it cannot work. It is a reason it is harder than the movie version suggests. Basketball fit is a real thing, and it does not care about narrative symmetry. There is also the roster math, which I am going to speak about carefully, because I am not going to invent numbers for you. Every team in this league operates under a hard set of financial rules, and those rules are more restrictive now than they have been at any point in this player's career. Teams that are already paying multiple max-level salaries have very little flexibility to add anybody, let alone a player of this magnitude. Whether Cleveland can construct something that works is a technical question, and anybody telling you with total confidence that they can or cannot is telling you more than they know. And there is one more thing about Cleveland that nobody wants to say out loud, so I will say it. Going home is only a perfect ending if it goes well. If he goes back and the fit is awkward, if the team underachieves, if there is friction, then the last image anybody has of this career is a 41-year-old legend looking out of place in the building where it all started. The upside of that story is enormous. The downside is worse than anywhere else on this list, because in Cleveland, it is personal. And think about what the last 8 years have actually looked like from the inside, because it explains why this exit feels so abrupt to people outside the building. Every single summer in Los Angeles was a referendum. Every roster move was analyzed as a message about whether the organization was serious about the window. Every slow start in November turned into a national conversation about whether the end had finally arrived. He has spent 8 years being the most scrutinized employee in American sports, in the market that produces the most scrutiny in American sports. Whatever comes next, it is being chosen by somebody who knows exactly what that costs. So Cleveland is the emotional favorite and the narrative favorite. That is real. But emotional favorite is not the same thing as most likely, and I would be lying to you if I pretended those were the same word. And here is the thing. While everybody has been arguing about Cleveland, there is a team in this conversation that almost nobody put on their card, a scenario that sounds absurd for about the first 10 seconds and then starts making an uncomfortable amount of sense the longer you look at it. We are going to get to that one, and I think it is going to change how you see this entire situation. But first, we have to deal with the two franchises that have the coldest, most practical arguments of anybody. Let's talk about Miami. Miami is the second name that comes up in almost every version of this discussion, and unlike Cleveland, the Miami argument is not primarily emotional, it is structural. It is about how that organization actually operates, and it is about a history that worked. Start with the history, because it is real and it is not small. He went to the Miami Heat in 2010. He won there. That is where the first championships came from. That is where a player who had been carrying an enormous amount of criticism about not being able to finish finally finished. Miami is where the ring drought ended. Whatever else you want to say about how that partnership started, on the basketball side it delivered, and it delivered fast. So there is no learning curve there. He knows the building, he knows the city, he knows how that organization talks to its players, what it expects and what it does not tolerate. There is not a single team in this league with a more clearly defined internal culture, and the reputation of that culture is that it is demanding, it is professional, and it does not do drama. For a player at the very end of a 23-year career who has spent the last decade dealing with an unbelievable amount of noise, an organization that is famous for keeping things quiet is not a small selling point. There is also the practical stuff that nobody puts in a highlight video, but every player over 35 thinks about constantly. Florida, no state income tax, a shorter, easier travel profile than a lot of the league, a city that a lot of veteran players want to live in anyway. Those things are not why anybody signs anywhere, but they are absolutely part of the calculation, and pretending otherwise is naive. Now the cold part. What is the actual basketball ceiling there? That is the honest question with Miami, and I do not think anybody can answer it confidently right now. This is a franchise that has spent recent years in that difficult middle zone, competitive enough to be in the playoff conversation, not obviously constructed to win 4 rounds. Adding a 41-year-old superstar to a team like that raises the floor immediately and dramatically. Does it raise the ceiling to championship level? That is a much bigger claim, and I am not going to make it for you. There is also the timeline question, and it cuts both ways. A player entering season 24 is not signing anywhere for a 5-year build. Whatever he does next is short horizon by definition, which means the only rational reason to sign him is to win right now, which means Miami has to be able to argue, credibly, that they are a piece away rather than a rebuild away. Whether that argument holds is exactly the kind of thing front offices spend entire summers fighting about internally. Now Philadelphia, and I want to spend real time here, because I think the Philadelphia scenario is the most underrated one in this whole conversation, and it is the one that gets treated most dismissively online. The Philadelphia 76ers have no emotional history with this player. Zero. He has no roots there. He never played there. There is no homecoming story, no unfinished business, no ghosts. And that is precisely why the Philadelphia case is interesting, because it is the only one on this list that has to stand entirely on basketball. Philadelphia is a franchise that has spent an enormous amount of the last decade in one specific kind of pain, which is the pain of being good enough to matter and not good enough to finish. Talented rosters, real expectations, springs that ended earlier than they were supposed to, over and over, in ways that became almost a running joke nationally. That kind of history creates a very particular hunger inside an organization. It creates urgency, it creates a willingness to do something dramatic, because the alternative is running the same experiment again and hoping for a different result. And there is a structural argument here too. The Eastern Conference has been in flux. The old order of the conference has been broken up by injuries, by roster turnover, by teams aging out of their windows. There is not a single dominant, unbeatable super team sitting at the top of that side of the bracket the way there was in certain other eras, which means a well-constructed roster that adds a player of this size does not need to be perfect. It needs to be top 4 and then healthy in April. That is a genuinely reachable target, and it is exactly the kind of math a front office uses to justify a swing. There is also a basketball fit argument that people skip past. A team that already has established interior scoring and rim pressure but has struggled with playmaking and half-court organization in the postseason is, in theory, the ideal landing spot for a player whose greatest remaining skill is not athleticism at all. It is decision-making. It is knowing where every player on the floor is going to be 2 seconds before they get there. That skill does not decline the way legs decline. It is the last thing to go, and in his case, it may never have gone at all. Now the cold part on Philadelphia, and it is a serious one. Health. That organization's recent history with availability has been brutal, and adding a 41-year-old to a roster that has already had trouble getting its best players on the floor together does not obviously solve anything. If the plan requires 4 specific people to play 70 games each, that plan has been tried in that city before, and you know how it went. And there is a cultural risk. Philadelphia is not a patient sports town. It is one of the most demanding, most emotionally invested, least forgiving environments in American sports. That can be fuel. It can also be a very hostile place to have a bad November. And there is one more angle on Philadelphia that I think gets missed entirely. A player at the end of a career this long is not only choosing basketball fit, he is choosing what the last season feels like day to day. In Cleveland, he would be a monument, and monuments get treated carefully. In Miami, he would be a returning champion. In Philadelphia, he would be something he has not been in a very long time, which is a hired gun brought in specifically to solve a problem, in a building where nobody owes him anything, and the only currency is April. Some players at 41 would run from that. Some would find it clarifying. Nobody outside his circle knows which of those he is right now, so that is the 3 that everybody is discussing. Cleveland, with the story. Miami, with the culture and the history. Philadelphia, with the cold, practical, unsentimental basketball case. And now let's get to the one that makes people laugh at first. Golden State. I want to preface this properly. The Golden State Warriors have come up as a possibility in this conversation, and I am labeling it exactly as what it is. A possibility that has been raised, not a confirmed pursuit, not a reported meeting, not a negotiation. Nobody has announced anything. But it deserves real airtime, because once you get past the initial reaction, the logic underneath it is not stupid at all. Start with the obvious objection because it is the funny one. This is the franchise on the other side of the most famous single moment of his career. The 2016 Finals, the 73-win team, the 3-1 comeback. He built the biggest chapter of his legend out of beating them, and they built a dynasty that repeatedly ended his seasons. If you're looking for the 2 poles of an entire decade of basketball, it is those 2 names. So the idea of him in that jersey feels like a category error. It feels like a glitch. Rivals do not just wander across the line at the end. Except they do, constantly, and they always have. This sport is full of players who spent a decade trying to destroy a franchise and then finished a career inside it. Uniforms are not identities, they are employment. The emotional weight of a rivalry is something fans carry, and it turns out fans carry it a lot longer than the participants do. Now the actual basketball logic, what would that even look like? Here is the argument. That organization has spent more than a decade running one of the most distinctive offensive systems in basketball, built on movement, on shooting gravity, on players who understand spacing at a level most teams never reach. And a system like that is, in theory, the most forgiving possible environment for an aging superstar, because it does not require him to create everything from a standstill. It requires him to read, to pass, to make the correct decision quickly. If you're trying to design a place where a 41-year-old genius can still be enormously valuable without carrying 100 possessions a night, you would design something close to that. There is also the pure spectacle of it, and let's not pretend that does not matter to anybody. The idea of the defining rivals of an entire era, finishing on the same floor, in the same colors, in what would be a final season for more than one all-time great, is the kind of thing that would break the sport for a week. And now the cold part, which is real. Every question you can raise about the other teams applies here too, plus a few extra. There is the same financial rigidity every contending team faces under the current rules. There is the same question about whether the roster around him is built to actually win 4 rounds. And there is a specific question about how many high-usage veterans one team can carry before the math stops working. Because possessions are finite and everybody in that scenario has spent a career being the primary option. I want to be very direct with you here. I am not telling you this is happening. There is no reporting that says it is happening. What I am telling you is that it has been floated, that the reflexive dismissal of it is based on emotion rather than analysis, and that if it did happen, it would not be a joke. It would be a coherent basketball decision wrapped in the most dramatic packaging imaginable. And that brings me to the part where this whole thing stops being a normal free agency story and starts getting genuinely strange. Because here is what I keep coming back to, and I would like you to actually think about it with me. Everything I just spent 20 minutes describing is speculation. All of it. The Cleveland case, the Miami case, the Philadelphia case, the Golden State case. Every one of those is analysis built on top of a single confirmed fact, which is that he told one team he is leaving. That is the entire foundation. One sentence of confirmed information, and an entire industry building skyscrapers on top of it. And normally, by this point in a story of this magnitude, that would not be the situation. Normally there would be leaks. There would be a meeting reported. There would be a team emerging. There would be a source describing a direction. The information ecosystem around this league is enormous and extremely leaky, and secrets of this size do not usually survive very long. This one has, and the silence itself has become the story. So let's talk about why the delay might be happening, and I am going to lay out several possibilities and be honest that I cannot tell you which one is true. Possibility 1, and probably the most boring and most likely. The mechanics are complicated. The financial rules governing this league are genuinely restrictive right now, and the teams that are attractive to a player at the end of his career are almost by definition teams that are already expensive. A player of this stature does not simply pick a city and sign a piece of paper. Somebody has to actually make the numbers work, and making the numbers work can require other moves to happen first, in the right order, involving other people, some of whom have their own contracts and their own preferences. That kind of thing takes time, and it produces exactly this sort of silence, because until it is done, there is nothing to announce. Possibility 2. He is genuinely undecided. Not strategically undecided, actually undecided. And honestly, why would he not be? Consider what he is actually choosing between. He is choosing between a homecoming with enormous emotional weight and real basketball complications. A return to a place where he already won. A cold, unsentimental fit with a hungry organization, and a scenario that would rewrite how his whole era is remembered. Those are not variations on one another. Those are 4 different endings to the same life. A person is allowed to take a few weeks with that. Possibility 3, and this is the one that keeps getting whispered, and I think we have to address directly. The family situation. He has a son in this league. That is a fact, and it is public, and it is unprecedented. Whatever a person's stated priorities are, when a player is at the end of a career this long, the question of where his family is and what his sons are doing is not a footnote in the decision. I do not know how much weight it carries. Nobody outside that house does. But it is real, and it is the kind of factor that does not resolve on a media schedule. And possibility 4. The one that is sitting under this entire conversation like a shadow that everybody feels and almost nobody says. Retirement. Now I want to be careful, because this is exactly the point in a video like this where somebody would normally start inventing things, and I am not going to do that. There has been no announcement. There has been no statement suggesting he is considering walking away. He told the Lakers he intends to play somewhere else, and that is an intention to keep playing, not to stop. But here is the honest observation, and it is an observation, not a report. Every additional week that passes without a decision changes the emotional temperature of this story. A player who is excited about a specific team usually goes to that team. Speed communicates certainty, and the absence of speed, fairly or not, gets read by everybody watching as the absence of certainty, and you can understand why it would be hard. This is a man who has been a professional basketball player since he was 18 years old. He has never had an adult life that was not organized around a season. Every single autumn for 23 years, there has been a camp to report to, a schedule to attack, a target. That is not a job. That is an entire identity and an entire structure of time. Signing somewhere is not just choosing a team. It is choosing to do the whole thing again. another training camp at 41, another 82-game regular season, another set of flights, another set of back-to-backs, another January in the cold, another spring where the expectation on him is to be the best player in the building. He has done that 23 times. He knows exactly what it costs. In a way, nobody else on earth does. So maybe the silence is logistics. Maybe it is family. Maybe it is a negotiation happening behind a wall nobody has managed to see over. Or maybe it is a man sitting with the size of what he is deciding and taking exactly as long as it deserves. I do not know. And I would rather tell you I do not know than sell you a guess. And notice something about how he has handled this so far, because it is consistent with the last 23 years. There has been no leak from his side, no trial balloon, no convenient story appearing at a convenient moment to pressure anybody. For a player who has been accused of managing his own narrative more aggressively than anybody in the sport, this has been remarkably controlled. Whatever is happening, it is happening on his schedule, not the media's, and everybody else is simply going to have to wait. What I do know is what is happening to everybody else while he thinks, and this is the part I find genuinely remarkable about this specific moment. The league is frozen. Think about how many decisions are downstream of this one. 4 organizations at minimum cannot finalize their off-season plans until they know. They cannot commit their remaining flexibility, because if there is any chance at all of landing him, spending that flexibility on somebody else would be organizational malpractice, which means other free agents are waiting too, because the teams that might sign them are waiting, which means the trade market is slower because teams do not want to make a move that closes a door on a possibility. One undecided player is holding up a meaningful portion of an entire industry's summer. There are front office executives who have not had a proper day off in a month because they have to be ready to move within hours if a phone rings. There are coaching staffs building 2 completely different versions of a playbook. There are people in ticket sales and marketing in multiple cities who have designed 2 different campaigns and cannot launch either one. That is a level of influence over a sport that essentially no other player has ever had at any age, let alone entering season 24. And it says something about the sheer scale of what he still is, because you could look at this cynically and say, it is a 41-year-old, how much can he possibly change a team? And the answer is, enough that 4 serious organizations have put their entire summer on hold to find out. Front offices do not freeze for nostalgia, they freeze for value. Whatever the tape says about him at this age, the people whose jobs depend on being right about players are behaving like he is still a player who decides seasons. So where does that leave us today? Here is the honest summary, and I want to close the loop cleanly on what is real. It is the end of July. LeBron James has told the Los Angeles Lakers he will play elsewhere in 2026-27, closing out 8 seasons in Los Angeles that began when he signed there as a free agent in 2018. His agent has described him as a free agent. He has not decided where he is going. There is no deadline. Cleveland, Miami, and Philadelphia are the franchises at the center of the conversation, with Golden State raised as an additional possibility. It would be his 24th NBA season, which nobody has ever done at this level. Everything else, including everything I laid out about fits and rosters and windows, is analysis. And I want to say one last thing about the size of this, because I think in the noise of a new cycle, we lose track of it. Whatever team he picks is getting the final season of a career that will not be repeated. Not the final season of a great player, the final season of the leading scorer in the history of this sport. A man who won a championship in Miami, who won one in Cleveland by climbing out of a 3-1 hole against a 73-win team in a finals that nobody had ever climbed out of, and who won one in Los Angeles. 3 franchises, 3 completely different situations, 3 eras of basketball played at the highest level in all of them. That is not a signing. That is a franchise buying the last chapter of the biggest story in the sport and getting to put its logo on it forever. So now I actually want to hear from you and be specific, because this is the fun part. Where should he sign? Not where do you think he will sign? That is a different question. Where should he sign? Is it Cleveland? Because a career that starts in Akron should end in Akron, and the circle should close. Is it Miami? Because that is where the winning started, and that organization has never once let a season get away from it for cultural reasons. Is it Philadelphia? Because it is the cleanest basketball fit, and a city that is starving for it? Or do you want the chaos, the Golden State version, the ending nobody would have believed a decade ago? Drop it in the comments. Tell me the team, and tell me the reason in one line. And be honest about whether you are voting with your head or your heart, because I read them and the best answers end up in the next video. And if you think this ends with a retirement announcement instead of a signing, say that too, because a lot of people are quietly thinking it and almost nobody is typing it. If you got this far, hit the like button and subscribe with notifications on, because when this decision finally lands, we are going to be all over it within hours, with the full breakdown of what it actually means for that roster and for the rest of the conference. And next up, we are getting into the other half of this story, which is what the Los Angeles Lakers do now. Because losing him is not just losing a player. That franchise built 8 years of everything around one man, and now they have to figure out who they are without him, in a city that does not accept rebuilding as an answer. That one gets ugly fast. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.